Okay, they got this interior door that was installed, and now they want a mortise lock. There's a couple different ways. You can get a machine to install these, or you can do it with a spade bit. I'll show you how I do it. I have it outside now because this is messy. I prefer to do it outside. I've got the door stabilized. You need these stable. So when the door was in there, I just put 2 marks where the latch and the deadbolt should line up. So now I just taped off these edges, and I'm going to put tape on the sides of the door because I don't want to scratch it up. First thing I want to do is trace the outline of the lock. I just eye it up, get it centered, and then draw my lines. I know that the tape is the end. And now what I want to do is set my router to cut the depth of this plate. And we're going to cut that whole section the depth of this plate, and we're going to run it between these lines. But before I do that, just take a chisel and do the corners at least. I like to do this end piece and the corners. And you're doing a plunge here. You're going to plunge the router in there, so make sure it's stabilized because you don't want this thing running all over the place. I do the first one right down the middle, and then I work my way toward the line and just take off a little bit each time. You don't want to start it right on the line and try to bring it down because you're cutting a lot of wood and it could get away from you. So this is more accurate and easier on your router. I'm going to clean these up with the chisel. And of course, you could hand chisel this whole thing, but you see that's very fast and easy. And that fits right in perfectly. And if you miss something, you know, just go back carefully with the chisel or the router and you get it till this thing fixed. And you don't always get them perfect. Okay, now we want to mark these holes. We know we need to dig our deeper hole has to go right down here. Okay? You don't want to make the mistake of cutting the whole section deep because then you have no place to screw it in. So you want to go, we want to give ourselves a little bit of room. So we'll just cut our hole from there to right there. Okay, now I'm going to mark this. You see, that gives me plenty of wiggle room to get this thing in there. Now, you could try drilling this out with a spade bit. It's hard, but you get the idea. You put the right spade bit in there and just go there, and all the way across. It's very difficult, especially when you get down deep, to get all that stuff out of there, but I've done it. It's a lot of very careful chiseling and vacuuming. You've got to have a vacuum when you're doing this. Otherwise, you got to pick up the door and dump the stuff out somehow. And then you want a bit that's wider than the body here, but not as wide as this. A professional mortising machine can cost $2,500, $3,000, and they are great. I don't do enough to justify that expense, so I got this rig off of Amazon for $250. Here's how I work it. I center it over the cut and clamp it on. Here's my bit, and I choose one that is not as wide as the plate, but it's wider than the body, and that's going to work perfectly. So my cutter just screws into the end of this shaft. So now I have to mount that in the machine so that it's centered. Now, because this has these slots and these things can move around, I can set this up straight or I can angle it. I do whatever it takes to get that bit centered where I need it. I take this like sleeve and put it underneath here. And I just pop that up through there. Then I take this part, the threaded part, and just screw it in from the top and tighten those so this thing is centered. So with that centered in my hole, I had to put these washers on. I forgot about that. That holds it in place better. And then I give it a little crank. Just put something in there to give you some leverage to turn that thing, because you want these tight. You do not want that thing moving around. we have to set the travel of this thing, how far it goes in either direction. I don't want my cut going past that line, so I'm going to bring it so the edge of the blade is just right, just past the line. You got to give yourself a little wiggle room. And then you move this, you can slide this thing and tighten it. And I do the same here. That way, if I make a mistake, have a brain fart, fall asleep, I'm not going to go past my lines. I'm still going to do this very carefully and look at everything, but this is like dummy proof. So now I'll just do the same thing over here. I'm going to go right to about there. So now we have it centered and we've set the travel. So now it's time to set the depth, and that's where we use this collar. So with that collar loose, this can move up and down, and obviously that's where the cut is going to start. Now we need it to go as deep as this body, but I like to go just a little bit deeper. So I'm going to set it like that. So we know it's going to go the depth of the body plus about 1/4 inch. So with that set, I'm going to tighten those screws and we know the depth will be correct. Okay, with those screws tightened, we know that thing's going to travel the length of the body plus a little bit more. I included the plate and I gave it like another 1/8 inch. So it's basically going to go as deep as the body plus 1/4 inch, and that will be fine. And here's what makes this machine so inexpensive. Once you're all set up, you just attach a drill. And I prefer a corded drill. So I'm not going to fire it up and jam it in there. I'm just going to do a few easy tests throughout the run and just make sure everything is set accurately. You can see I just went about 1/4 inch deep in a few places, and then I ran the bit backwards and forwards. This thing will cut up and down and side to side, and the professional machines do it real quick and easy. This one requires a lot of care. You got to hold this thing. Everything wants to rattle around, so don't go too deep. Just go shallow cuts and then back and forth to clean it out and vacuum it, and keep checking along the way. I like to hold my hand right here. If you put 2 hands on the drill, this thing could shake around and easily bounce out or blow out the side of your door. So I'm very careful and don't go too deep with any cut. And I stop and vacuum every few passes so I can see what's going on. Now you can see I'm at the end, so I'm just going to do a few more passes back and forth and up and down just to make sure everything's clean. Before you take anything apart, look down in there and see, is it clean? Because sometimes you missed a row and you got to go back at a certain height, or you didn't go far enough over on the edge. You see, I went just past my line, and that's fine because there's the hole where I'm going to put my screw, so we've got plenty of wood. Just going to unclamp it and move it and check. Okay, with the rig off and vacuumed out, look how clean that looks. See how easy that was? Now we want to drop this in there, and look at that. Perfect. Look how pretty that is. And you want to try the mechanism there, make sure it's working, make sure it's not too tight. It's got to wiggle around, lift it up and down, make sure it's not, you know, hitting back here. You got to give yourself enough room for this thing to work. So that looks great. Now, when you're putting in a more exotic and bigger, like front door entry lock, a Baldwin, an MTech, or something like that, they will give you templates and diagrams and measurements, because you could be drilling various holes. Some holes go all the way through the door. Some holes only go through one side. You have to pay attention to that. I'm not even reading these instructions because this thing is so easy. So I'm not going to set it right on the edge of the door because it's going to go down. So I'm setting it flush with the door, and then I just put a pencil mark in there, and then I just put a mark in that keyhole. And since we know there's going to be a knob on each side and a key on each side, these holes have to go all the way through the door. Now, since we cut our mortise, this is no longer solid wood. I don't want to stick a big drill bit through there and then risk, you know, having it get crooked and then push out the other side. So I just used my speed square to transfer these marks to the other side. So I know I need to drill my holes here and here so they'll line up. Now, for drilling these, I'm going to use the 1-inch bit, because you see that gives me plenty of room. You don't want to cut this too tight. Locks need room to breathe and work. So that'll be just fine. If you've done this properly, you should see those 2 holes come through when you drop this in. It's in there, and look at that. Perfect. If you cut this too close, what I would do, don't try to drill it. Take your router and just run it around the edge. Make that a little bit bigger, but check with whatever faceplate you have. So now we can screw this in, rehang the door, put in our knob. Okay, I got the lock installed, and when you're putting in those little screws, I always pre-drill with a centering bit, because if that screw gets swirly, it can really become a pain in the butt, especially if your hole is too deep, is too close to the screw. So pre-drill that thing. Now, unfortunately, they don't have their faceplates yet, but the faceplates for these interior is a rectangle that just goes over here, and it has a tiny screw in each corner that just goes over. We just want to make sure the thing works. We got our new strike plate in, so that closes just fine. And the lock engages, locked up, unlock it, open it. Beautiful job.